All right, can everyone hear me? Hello, as you heard, I'm Brandi Vincent, Defense Scoop's Pentagon reporter, and I'm so thrilled to moderate this panel. Thank you to the Truman Center for hosting and inviting us, and for all of you for being here. As you heard, today we are going to explore how these innovative leaders across the Defense Department and the intelligence community, academia, and the private sector are really working to understand, identify, inspire, upskill, and onboard tech talent from communities around the nation. We're also going to discuss how they're using real-time data to track let me try that again. We're going to discuss how they are tracking real-time data trends to inform their actions and ultimately maintain America's technological edge in the years to come. We have a stellar lineup of longtime leaders here, also very techie experts. I could go on and on about their expertise, both professionally and personally, and the impacts that they've made to date, but I have to be brief for time, so please Google all of them. I will tell you what their current roles are, though. We have Dr. Stacey Dixon. She serves as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Dr. Daryl Pines, who is the President of the University of Maryland and the Glenn L. Martin Professor for Aerospace Engineering. We've got Mr. Maynard Holliday, who's performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Critical Technologies in the Department of Defense. And we've got Dr. Jarrett Riddick, who's currently a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology, CSET. And formerly, he was the principal director for autonomy in DoD's Office of the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. So welcome to our lovely panel, and let's go ahead and dive right in. I want to kick off and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you guys have faced. I want to let the audience know I've prepared a little bit of questions to start off with, and then we're going to go into a Q&A that I'll invite you up. So please be thinking up your questions along the way. But starting with the challenges that you guys have faced and continue to overcome in your careers, they're layered, they're complex, and they've come at every stage. And so, Mr. Holliday, I want to start with you on this. When you studied mechanical engineering at Carnegie Mellon University, you were one of only 15 African American engineers in your class at the time. Can you talk to us about what your career has been like as one of the first Black men in America to innovate, as you have, in the government and the robotics realm, and why you wanted to help bring this group of innovators together today?
So Brandi, thank you for that. If you Google me, you're going to find out how old I am and how long ago that was. And that experience, being at CMU and watching my peers attrit, for one reason or another, and 15 started, only 3 of us graduated. And it was baptism by fire, but we had, the support mechanisms that are now currently known as DEI, but they were on campus helping us with course files and old tests, all things that the fraternities had that we also were able to partake of. And so my career took off from there, recruited by the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California. I became a card-carrying member of the nuclear priesthood, and met my good friend here, Dr. Pines, to my right, at the beginning of our careers, and then was able to get a scholarship to study at Stanford, which my advisor at the time from CMU said, "You're not going to have any problem here." And I'm like, "Really? This is Stanford?" He was like, "Nah, it's because you have worked so hard at CMU, you're not going to have an issue getting through here, not because it was easy, but because the level of my academic preparation was there." So, and then I'll just close with, how Dr. Pons and I met. So when you're in these environments where you are the only, there's an attraction when you see somebody of color walking around, these spaces where normally there are not. And so when I saw Darryl, when he joined Livermore some years after I did, we had to talk about our experiences and how we got to these places. And so we've mutually supported one another over our careers, and I'll let him talk about that when he introduces himself. But so those are my experiences to get to, as I said, the first rung in my career ladder.
Absolutely. Dr. Dixon, you are the first person of color ever confirmed as Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence and the highest ranking African American woman in the intelligence community. There's really a historic element to your service that I really think it's important to spotlight. I imagine you've been a first at many points in your career, so what are some of the things that you've encountered in these rarefied spaces, as he says, and also that you've learned along the way, and how is it informing your aims now as you continue to pave the way for the next generation?
Thanks, Brandi. I do think it's important to acknowledge these sort of historical firsts, and then my personal preference is, okay, let's now move past that and get to work. So I don't want to be remembered as being the first. I want to be remembered for what I've delivered as part of this job. And I think that's true for many of us that end up serving in that role, but we do acknowledge how important it is for people to have role models. I had role models who were not African American. I had people who supported my career who were not African American or not women, and that was actually really, really useful. And I try to do that now for all members of the workforce. But there were days where I would walk into rooms being the principal person leading a meeting, and people would still be waiting for the principal person leading the meeting to be walking into the room. And you can either let that impact you, or you can move on, laugh about it, and kind of keep going. And I don't counter that anymore in this role. People know that I'm going to be showing up as me, so it's not a surprise anymore. But there were those moments, and there were those days. But it's important to have your network. Your network, not only of people who look like you, who have shared experiences, but the broader network of just great people that work in these wonderful organizations that all of us are part of, who are allies, who are partners, who are willing to look at you and what you can deliver, what you can bring to the table, and that's what they see about you. That's what they notice, not what you are packaged as. But we have to recognize that not everyone has those experiences, and how do we make sure that we level that playing field so people can have the same experience, no matter what demographic they come from, no matter what background they come from. We want them to all have an opportunity to succeed in our places.
Absolutely. I was talking to some of Mr. Holliday's team about this too. Growing up in South Louisiana and then moving away to DC much later in my career made me really understand how much representation matters, and at a young age especially. So when we get to our point where we discuss solutions, I absolutely want to talk about that. First, I want to talk a little bit about data and how all of you are really using it to kind of get at some of these issues. Dr. Pines, when we were preparing for this, you shared some pretty breathtaking statistics with me about how over the next decade, the number of eligible college-ready U.S. high school students is projected to go down. Can you expand on that for our audience?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Brandi, and thank you for having me as part of this panel. First, let me just answer my colleague Maynard's sort of history. So we go back now, 32 years, 42 years?
They have so many
35 years.
Y'all, just wait.
And we did meet at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and it was just nice to have someone to be in fellowship with in engineering. At Lawrence Livermore National Lab is a predominantly physics-run lab, and engineers are considered second-class citizens. I said it on public, but that's what I believed then. I still believe that's true today. And but so you needed to find first another engineer of color, and it was just great that Maynard and I hooked up so nicely. And he was into robotics, and I was into space structures, and we were working on these Star Wars programs. You all remember Star Wars? I was actually part of those programs. Something called Brilliant Eyes and Brilliant Pebbles was why I was hired. And it was just great because I didn't want to do that nuclear work that he was doing. But anyway, but where we, fast forward to where we are today, as Dr. Dixon just mentioned, we need to understand that in the United States, roughly about 3.5 million kids graduate from high school every year. However, because the birth rates in the United States in the early 2000s were less than 2 per family, so there's about 1.7, 1.8. In the decades of the 90s, they were like 2.3. So because of those numbers, you just fast forward, you just add 18 to those numbers and keep adding 18 every year to those numbers, well, it projects now that we're going to have in 2030, 2036, a $300,000 drop in the number of high school students. So go from 3.5 to 3.2 million. You say, well, that's not a lot, but it's actually really important, because what's happening in the United States and in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense is that the need for STEM graduates and other graduates is still increasing. And there's such a high desire to have those graduates. So, so that's first of all problematic just by those basic numbers. But it's even more exacerbated by the following. Over all of these years, last 40 years, only 4% of those 3.5 million people that graduate from high school every year go into STEM. So I want you to just think about that. 3.5 million people graduate from high school in the United States every year, but only 4%, and that number, by that flat line, 4%, has barely changed, 4.1, 3.9, over the last 40 years. So what does that mean? It means that today we have 140,000 people going into STEM majors in colleges and universities across the United States, and then 2030 and 2036, that'll go down, if that 4% stays the same, that will go down to 128,000. That's just simple math. 4% of 3.2, 4% of 3.5. Of course, I'm an engineer, so I can do this really quickly. So my point making is that we actually need that number to be 200,000 going into STEM. However, there is some hope. There is some hope. Also, during the same time period, last 5, 10 years, the number of foreign students coming to the United States, believe it or not, even during the tumultuous times of the pandemic, now that we're out of it, has actually increased for the last 3 years, each year, by 10%. So the deficit that we're going to have domestically can possibly be compensated by the growth that we're going to have internationally, because people are still coming to the United States to make their way. And most of those people still stay. 80% of those people still stay in the United States. So that's important. So there's hope there. There's also hope because the National Science Foundation has put a lot of effort in K-12 STEM education. And it's starting to bear fruit. Now, I just want to share with you one program that I've been involved with that tries to instill engineering in every high school in the United States. So the program is called Engineering for Us All. It's for any high school student. It doesn't require calculus. It doesn't require pre-calculus. It only requires algebra. Because you can teach engineering design principles, like the scientific method that you all learned in biology or in chemistry. Remember that? You can also learn the engineering design principles. It's not complicated. You don't need high-level math to do it. So we've been able to do this in 90 high schools in the United States, taught over 8,000 students who now have a basic understanding of engineering, and many of those young people have gone off to Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, Purdue, you name it, Drexel, all kinds of engineering. I'm doing this because he went to Stanford and I went to Berkeley. That's why I did that. I'm just like to mess with him. Oh, I'm sorry. And she went to Stanford too. And she went to Georgia Tech. It's just a little fun that we're having up here on the panel. Anyway, the point I'm making is that there is hope because these STEM programs are starting to bear fruit, and these young people are now starting to go into science and other majors that are in STEM that will hopefully lead them going into the intelligence community and into the Department of Defense. So, thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing that. It might seem obvious for some, but why is it so very concerning looking to the future, what this potential gap might look like or challenge might look like?
Well, from my perspective, and I'm sure also from Dr. Dixon and Mr. Holliday and Dr. Riddick's perspective, is that we see this growth that's happening in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and now the emerging field of quantum. And all of them affect the Department of Defense, national security, and the intelligence community, we don't know, potentially exponentially. So we're going to need skilled labor in those domain spaces in the future, in the present and in the future going forward at the thousands of numbers, right? So that's why it's important, and that's why we focus on those topics.
Thank you, sir. And it's great to have both you and Dr. Riddick on this panel to also supply the kind of global perspective of this. At CSET, you're doing research into what you told me is diversity as a national security asset. Talk to us a little bit about that, and really, how does this strategic gap America is facing when it comes to producing STEM talent compared to China, which the Pentagon has identified as a near-peer competitor?
Yeah, so thanks, Brandi, and thanks to Truman Center for this program today. You know, I was reminded, President Truman, 70 years ago, in a commencement address at Howard University, said the words that talent knows no boundaries based on race, national origin, or creed, and then went on to say, 70 years ago, that the United States needs the energy and excitement of all of its citizens. And so that really sort of was said in the post-war World War II era, and those words could be no more true today as we face this emerging great power competition between the Russia, United States, and China. Recently, I did some work at CSET to look at world leaders in STEM, and these are numbers that had not been really updated publicly since 2016. And you know, we can see the tremendous gap between China and the United States. Actually, in that list of top STEM producers, the United States trails China and India, with Russia right behind. And so right there, we see great power competition in terms of STEM production. And we know that in this great power competition, this is a race for technological dominance, which means having the right talent at the right time in this competition. And when you think about that numbers gap, it's probably one that, you know, one-to-one we cannot close. Dr. Pines gave you some statistics there. But is the quality advantage that we have to maintain that will really give us the advantage. But when we think about, you know, immigration, obviously, is a way to fill that gap. The traditional pipelines that folks like Dr. Pines are responsible for are necessary. But there are also vast numbers of folks, untapped pools of talent, that are not in the technology sort of discussion today. And so some of the work that I'm doing at CSET is to look at, can technology-based economic development be a tool to bring new members into the discussion around technology. But one thing we know is that when we talk about these underrepresented populations, that many of these populations are in underinvested areas or underserved areas, or are parts of communities that we would consider vulnerable communities. So in the great power competition that we face today, there's sort of a new sort of facet to these vulnerable communities. These vulnerable communities present susceptibility with capable near-peer adversaries in this competition in a way that they didn't before in other strategic competitions. Think about the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the 2016 Russian meddling in the election. They said in 2016 that these Russian efforts, written in the Senate Intelligence Committee bipartisan report, that these efforts targeted the black community in the United States more than any other. It was a concerted effort to drive down black voter turnout. And so this shows you that there's a threat vector around issues in disparity and inequity that our capable near-peer adversaries are willing to exploit. And so for us in the United States, diversity has always been an asset. And now in this new competition with near-peer adversaries targeting this, we have a new sort of reason to think about, how do we use this diversity as an asset? How do we make sure that these communities that are being left behind are part of the conversation? So part of what I'm exploring, you know, right now, the United States through CHIPS and Science Act is committed billions and billions of dollars to place-based innovation and place-based industrial policy. So this is an effort, and when I visited Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, years ago, to the National Robotics Engineering Center, I saw that in Pittsburgh. 25 years ago, when Carnegie Mellon started the Robotics and Engineering Center there, in the Lawrenceville neighborhood, an underinvested area that had, you know, low population, low income. And over the course of 25 years, now Lawrenceville is the hottest real estate market, or one of the hottest real estate markets in Pittsburgh. And the centerpiece of Robotics Row, which is a collection of robotics startups. But what's missing when I look at the data is what happened in the legacy community to those populations that were there in Lawrenceville when this started. And now, as we're investing money through CHIPS and Science, can we build the metrics and frameworks to ensure that those investments also build resilience within these vulnerable communities that could eventually mitigate some of the susceptibility and great power competition? So the sentence changes from having a diverse workforce that looks like America to having a diverse workforce that can actually mitigate susceptibility and great power competition.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm excited to see your research as it develops as well. And you bring up a good point that I didn't think about, but the CHIPS Act and other sort of mechanisms have been coming up through this administration as well to really kind of amplify and help those efforts. I want to stick on data for a little bit. Dr. Dixon, I want to discuss how the IC is being really intentional with data on this topic from your perch and under your leadership. What can you share about the IC's approach to data on diversity issues that is something that's also highlighted in the IC's annual demographic reports?
This is a report that is required by Congress that we produce every year, and we are very close to posting the fiscal year 2023 report on our website, public facing. And what's new about it this year is that we actually have intersectional data. So we actually have literally every person in our intelligence community, demographics that they align to, as well as gender, and we're able to break out different trends within the different populations, which actually has provided a lot of interesting information on barriers that particular demographic groups face that we can now do studies to figure out how do we alleviate whatever the barrier is that's keeping people from being successful. We see the data is wonderful. We actually see that our recruiting efforts are increasing and improving. We've got much more diversity coming into the pipeline. However, the hiring is not demonstrating the same sort of thing. So what is the barrier? There's something happening between that application point and the hiring that we can now focus on. We see, frankly, that there are minorities that are leaving in the first 5 years of employment in the intelligence community in a way that we didn't actually know that as a fact before. Now we can sort of dive in and say, what is it? Is it a sense of lack of belonging? Is it a lack of opportunities that we can then create programs that actually target these things so that, actually, I'll have to rethink how I was going to say it so that we can look more like America. But to your point, there are other reasons why you want to have the diversity, and it's a mission imperative for us. We need more great people bringing their ideas to the table, and these people come from all over the country. They come from all sorts of backgrounds, but we need everyone who comes in to be able to want to stay. Even if they leave for other opportunities, I want them to leave for something better and not because they're running away from something. So how do we make sure that we are fixing whatever those barriers are? And the data is tremendously helpful in that.
Absolutely. And it kind of sounds like there's an element of like you're letting the data take you places you didn't know you were going to be at the start. And I think that's maybe a trend for all of you that's really important.
It's helpful because we had anecdotes before. We had personal experiences, but now the data to actually put those two things together, and it's extremely powerful.
Absolutely. Well, let me know when the report drops, please. We'll be looking for that. We've heard a bit about the challenges and how you're tackling this with data and other resources, but I want to really dive into the solutions and explore how your teams are going at that. Mr. Holliday, University-Affiliated Research Centers, or UARCs, one of your favorite acronyms, I know. They're one mechanism that DoD is using to engage fresh talent. Can you discuss that and sort of the significance of the recently announced first ever HBCU-led UARC, which focuses on tactical autonomy?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a legacy item for me and this administration. When I worked in the Obama administration, one of the things the president would say to us is you're only in these jobs for a short period of time. Institutionalize change. One of his famous phrases was, "You are the change," and so live that. And so I'm going to drop some, as my millennial kids would say, I'm going to drop some science on, and talk about the U.S. government's UARC investment. And so UARC, and this is as of 2017, so the numbers are even more pronounced. 2017, the U.S. government spent $75 billion with a B on its UARCs. The total HBCU allocation was only $357 million, 0.5% of that really large number. And what you heard Dr. Riddick just say about this being a national security imperative, we can't have anybody left behind in our pipeline. And so again, when Dr. Riddick was in the building with me, we advocated to my former boss, who's now the Secretary of the Air Force, the need to tap this talent base and also to stand up the Air Force's first UARC. So they don't have one. It's the Army and Navy have the 14 others as well as the intelligence community. And so we were able to make the case based on data. And when I would work for Secretary Kendall in the administration beforehand, he had on his door, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And and so we met him. We met the moment and made that point. That I'll again foot stomp. 25% of Black STEM bachelor's degrees come from HBCUs. 50% of Black female STEM PhDs come from HBCUs. And my colleague, Dr. April Erickson, is one of those graduates, and she's the Assistant Secretary for Science and Technology. So, we had the data, and so we were able to make the case to Secretary Kendall and to Undersecretary Heidi Shyu, Undersecretary Bill LaPlante, to make an investment and have a consortium of HBCUs tackle this tactical autonomy issue, because we want to remove soldiers, sailors, and Marines from harm's way by having machines make first contact with the enemy or draw fire, so that we can save our exquisite assets, for a much more complex engagement. So we were able to get funding a year ago. The floor is $90 million over 5 years, and we were just talking to Dr. Dixon earlier this week about the IC's community potential in sourcing some tasks for these schools, and so this is something that is really important to us, and will, as I said, be a legacy long after I'm out of the job.
That's awesome. I want to stick with you for a second too, because in your career, I want to hear how you have seen diverse workforces yield better outcomes in building emerging technologies like AI.
Yeah, certainly. So just a quick anecdote. My career is hybrid, government, private sector. So between administrations, I was at the Rand Corporation, helping run their Silicon Valley office in San Francisco, and I had a colleague, again, through Stanford connections, and some of you might know her by name, Timnit Gebru. So she was the Google researcher who was fired for making the point about the bias in Google's large language models, and so she's part of the Algorithmic Justice League and a co-founder of Black in AI, and and so her peer, her contemporary, Joy Bolamwini, who's the scientist at the MIT Media Lab, noticed that these facial recognition algorithms were not recognizing Black faces or Black female faces, and she was able to bring that to the surface and have companies pull back from promoting their facial recognition as accurate, and it changed the landscape in that domain. And so it also led to the creation. I co-founded Black in Robotics after George Floyd, and so these having diverse people at the table to curate at the very fundamental level these data sets that are biased, because all this generative AI is really high performance compute working on large labeled data sets. But if the data sets are biased in when you're ingesting them, you're going to get biased results. So it's important to have diverse technical teams doing this work.
Absolutely, and that underscores something so critical with the whole topic around technology is like a lot of this stuff is still emerging and not fully realized, and it's just so critical to have all communities represented in the making and refining, because some of it's already been made. We're going to have to fix some things about that big time in all that. So, and it's also cool to just hear that this far into your career, you continue to be inspired to start new organizations. I can say that about all of you. Sticking on the solutions point for a second, Dr. Pines, I think you have some pretty exciting news to share as of today, hot off the press. So talk to us about that and how the University of Maryland is really working with people like Mr. Holliday, DOD, and the government to expand your arsenal of US-born cleared individuals that can swiftly go into the federal enterprise after.
Well, thank you so much. So last Friday, we were fortunate. We're one of the 15 so-called U.S. UARCs, but the only intelligence UARC in the United States at the University of Maryland. The name of our UARC is called the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, and the acronym is ARLIS, A-R-L-I-S. Well, last Friday, we heard from the Washington Headquarters Service that we had been awarded a $500 million IDIQ contract to support this research that Mr. Holliday is speaking about, and that supports Dr. Dixon in the intelligence community. So we're super excited. It's the largest contract in the history of the University of Maryland, but it's more than important than just that. It allows us, and this is now will be our 6th year supporting these activities in the intelligence community, that some of them are in human intelligence, some of them are in artificial intelligence, some of them are in an area called malign influence. And this is important because it allows universities to play a role in our national security enterprise and to accelerate another very important part of developing the workforce of the future that is diverse, as Mr. Holliday and Dr. Dixon have alluded to. So I have 2 programs that are very unique and helps grow the workforce in both the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. One of the programs is called RISC. It's an internship program across the entire United States, and it stands for Research Internship in Security and Challenges. So RISC, R-I-S-C. And it's open to any citizen or permanent resident across the United States at any community college, or university. Last year, we had 300 students participate, and they participated, 80% participated primarily virtually. So you don't have to even be in residency at the University of Maryland or in College Park. You get a technical mentor, and if you are working in the domain spaces that are in the cleared spaces, you get cleared. You get a clearance. So part of our role is to increase the pipeline of future eligible individuals who are domestic citizens or permanent residents who can go work for the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. So that's the #1 program. The second program that has come as a result of the UARCs, again, this is because we have this unique program in the United States called University Affiliated Research Centers, or UARCs. And the other program is called Ensure. So in the program called Ensure, what we do is we work with our university partners across the United States, and we find talent that are U.S. faculty and researchers who can work on the problems that are submitted to us from the intelligence community. So that allows us to bring diverse talent from HBCUs, so Howard, Morgan State, NCA&T are all partners, as well as majority institutions across the United States. They get to submit proposals, ideas to help solve some of these complex challenges that are being faced in the intelligence community. Now, I just want to say that we're very excited. If you can't see the joy and smile on my face, I want you to just look at me, because I'm smiling, I'm excited. But I want to go back, if you don't mind, Brandi, I want to give another anecdotal story that that I think you will be a little bit different than the artificial intelligence story that was just given by Mr. Holliday, which goes again to the point of diversity. So every human being in this room remembers the pandemic. I hope you remember it. Don't ever forget it, by the way. So remember the moments when you were afraid to go to the supermarket, worried about the vaccine. But remember the innovation ecosystem of the United States that yielded 2 available vaccines within 12 months of trials and research testing. And I want to emphasize the point that Mr. Holliday made. Where did it come from? The two organizations that you're very much familiar with, Moderna and Pfizer. But what you didn't know is that the research team at NIH was led by an African-American woman named Dr. Corbett, who actually figured out the spike protein that was leveraged by Moderna to develop the vaccine. Now, how many people knew that in this room? A couple of people, that's great. Guess where she is today? She was so fantastic, she's a Harvard professor with her own laboratory now, because that's how talented she was. And that's what we mean by we must use all of our talent across the United States. Yesterday I was at MIT, and the reason why I bring up the story is because yesterday I was at MIT at its commencement ceremony. I sit on the MIT Board of Trustees, and the CEO of Moderna was the keynote speaker, and he relayed this story to the audience about where did he get this innovation. He was a partner with NIH, and he was there to scale it and drive it to a vaccine. But it came from Dr. Corbett's lab. So we need to use everyone, or we all wouldn't be even sitting in this room, right, if we use all the talent of the United States. Thank you.
Absolutely. I did want to ask you one more thing, Dr. Pines, because we spoke about it a little bit, but something else you're doing at UMD beyond just working directly with the government and other mechanisms out there is exposing every student to AI now, which wasn't a thing when I was there. So can you just talk about how y'all are doing that?
Sure. By the way, Brandi was a student at University of Maryland.
Go
That's what
Terp.
she's talking about. She's a former journalism major. So we launched earlier this spring something called the Artificial Intelligence Interdisciplinary Institute at Maryland, or acronym is just AIM. And it's across the entire university. And going forward, starting in the fall of this year, every student, 41,000, will have to take an artificial intelligence class, because we think it's so transformational, the subject matter, that it will affect every domain space beyond ChatGPT. There'll be other tools that people will have to learn, of course. And remember, artificial intelligence, as where we are today, we're still in the sort of embryonic stages of how it will be used. And I just don't want you to be too afraid of it. It is like the calculator when we were growing up, a tool. Now, of course, like every tool, it can be abused, but we need to understand how this tool can be used for the benefit of positive good for society. So that's something that we're doing at University of Maryland, and it's literally across the entire university.
It's great that students are going to be exposed to that and voluntold that they'll be exposed to that in their careers, because they might not even know what it has to offer. Sticking on solutions, Dr. Dixon, I saw you in Florida earlier in May for the GeoInt conference, and while we were there, you were giving a keynote, and the host mentioned that you were going to be meeting with high school students, and then in your Q&A, one of those high school students, a young man, asked you a question, which I thought was awesome. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you're kind of thinking out of the box to recruit and encourage new talent and really be that representation that we were talking about earlier.
It's so critical whenever we travel around the country that my team knows that we want to find a university or a high school or both that have a very diverse population, and that, frankly, our community has not actually gone and visited before. So number one. So I'm exposing the idea and the conversation about careers in public service, careers in national security, and of course careers in the intelligence community, because so many students are not exposed to it. They don't even see it as a possibility for them going forward. And just planting that seed that early is wonderful. So these particular students were both from Orlando, Florida, where the conference was, as well as some that were brought from St. Louis, Missouri, which is a partnership city for this particular organization. And high schoolers ask the best questions. They are so thoughtful in surprising ways, and just really want to understand our business, want to understand what it's like, want to understand how do we think about international topics. And if I can just get a couple of them to change their minds and consider applying for us, and having opportunities, high school internships, having opportunities in college to come and try it out. Once people come in for a summer, if we're smart about and strategic about the work that we give them, we get them hooked. You know, they come in and they're like, okay, next year I'm going to do such and such. And maybe they'll try out a couple of different agencies, or maybe they'll just go to one. But part of it is just how do you get more people to know about the possibilities that we offer? And That's number one. And even if they don't choose to come work for us, they may work for a contractor that works for us, or they may go into academia and support us, or they just may have a better sense of the intelligence community, because frankly, there's a lot of negative things said about government, intelligence. I'd love to have ambassadors out there who can counteract that and within their own communities. And so it's a multi-scale thing, but just really enjoy interacting with the high school students and college students. And we all know that people make their decisions about whether they'll stay in STEM far earlier than just college. How do we get in front of folks early and let them know about the possibilities?
Absolutely, and it shouldn't be your responsibility, but for you, it really resonated with me that these are trips that you're going on for work and you're having your team seek out high schools there. That's really important, and I appreciate that part of your service. Dr. Riddick, one more question for you on solutions. I want to talk a little bit about the metrics that you're working to help develop to close some of those workforce gaps that you identified earlier. What are you learning about how to measure America's effectiveness at bringing vulnerable populations into discussions about advancing technology, and what benefits for national security would follow on from that?
So it's really interesting. I was just having a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and she was saying to me, well, you're doing all this social science stuff now, right? Well, you're talking about social science. And I'm an engineer, right? And I'm an engineer who spent 20 years in the DOD, doing hardcore engineering. And through all that work, I mean, you, over time, start to develop sort of a worldview, in a sense. And it is that worldview that has led me to a few things. One, I believe this in my heart, that bringing together disparate communities inside the United States, all pursuing a shared destiny, is one of the greatest accomplishments of American culture. I truly believe that. And yet at the same time, in the technology sphere, we don't see that representation. And I'm not talking about that from a perspective of, altruism or do the right thing, but we need the numbers. We need the numbers, and so we're missing an actual tool in the toolkit. And when I look at, why are we missing that? It's around design. It's something that Mr. Holliday was sort of talking about. And so I don't want to sort of indict people by their outcomes, but to say, perhaps in your design, you did not have the appropriate metrics to be able to build out sort of the things that will lead to the type of resilience that I'm talking about in some of these desperate communities. And true indeed. For example, Mr. Holliday was talking about the UARC. And how that came to be. There was a National Academy study that was looking at defense research capacity of HBCUs and minority institutions. There's an entire recommendation section there that talks about the lack of data. That when the committee got together to do this report and asked, hey, we need data, no one had the data. And there have been years of investment, years of congressional action, but no collection of the appropriate data to be able to understand what was the impact. And so we can have anecdotal discussions, but it's really scale that creates the impact that we're looking for. So this is why I'm now saying, okay, well, let me, I guess, do some social science, right? But really from an engineering perspective, can we start to develop these metrics that will help us be better at design? And then I think some social scientists look at me and say, you're a dispassionate engineer who's just looking at numbers. So I have to be careful with that, right? Because this is about people, but it's ultimately about saying that we now have a serious national security challenge that our adversaries have pointed to. These threat vectors, they have shown us that they will reach into these vulnerable communities and exploit this. And here we're having some very divisive conversations that frankly lend toward what the adversaries want to do. So how can we, be very careful about constructing metrics that will help us gain advantage from our diversity, which is clearly an asset.
Absolutely. For our audience, I want to remind you, I have one more question for our panelists, and then we're going to go to your Q&A. You're going to line up behind those microphones right there, so whenever you're ready, head over there. Perfect. I have one more brief question for our panel. What guidance do you have for defense leaders who want to inspire the next generation of diverse leaders and tech talent in defense and the IC?
This goes back to my conversations with the high schoolers. Talk about what you do. Invite people into our community. A number of us ended up working in the intelligence community in national security because someone said, hey, have you considered this agency? Or why don't you apply to this agency? That sort of personal interaction really goes a long way. So invite people in and then give them great opportunities. provide them help along the way, support them as they need it, and figure out what they want to do with their careers and continue to have them challenge themselves and continue to grow and learn about all these emerging technologies that are coming through.
Dr. Pines?
I mean, I would echo Dr. Dixon's comments and just say it's important that they expose young people to all kinds of STEM opportunities because it just gets them so excited. You know, I get to see them all the time because I go to middle schools, I go to high schools, and you know, you just got to see the joy in their faces. They're willing to learn, but they just need the exposure. They need somebody to come in and mentor them. And so I agree, if more people get out and reach back, we'll start to see this grow over time.
Yeah, and so I'd like to say, you know, between administrations, actually before, you know, I taught robotics in Oakland for that reason, to inspire. You know, and we've all heard the adage, you know, you got to see it to be it. And so I wanted them to see somebody like myself doing that. And what this generation has in common is they're all digital natives. You know, they are expert on the PlayStation, and you know, and they're your tech support at home because they, you know, they're you know, up on the latest technology. And so having them realize that they are already at a certain level, and if they want to create and have a say in what the future is going to look like, and that they're included, a STEM career is an option. So, and then, you know, be open to, you know, as you know, Dr. Dixon and Dr. Pine say, open to mentoring them and showing them, you know, an example of your career trajectory.
And, you know, from my perspective, I have this slogan that I share with a friend of mine: can technology be a key to the unfinished business of civil rights? And we heard the New York governor recently say kids in the Bronx can't even spell computer. But what would it look like to have a no-kidding research center in the Bronx that is doing research and engaging communities? This is how I think about this NREC problem. It's transportable. It could be many, many places. And the goal there is resilience, which is key to national security. So I'm looking at this technology piece as, you know, really filling in some long-term sort of challenges that we've had that take on a new perspective in great power competition now.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now for your questions. Please introduce yourself to our panel and go for it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Captain Sean Cooper, and I'm currently the Innovation Officer for the U.S. Army's 18th Airborne Corps, which contains about 40% of the close combat fighting forces of the U.S. Army. Dr. Dixon, I actually had the pleasure of preparing your VIP visit package, but I never got the chance to ask you a question when you came.
What an innovator.
So only at Truman. In my role as the innovation officer, I've seen an Army specialist, an E4, first-generation Palestinian-American, design and build mold sensors for the barracks in his Army to solving a department-wide problem. I've seen African-American combat engineers build AI models on their home computers to optimize their day-to-day operations. I've seen a junior sergeant who can trace out the entire supply chain of drone parts and build an NDAA-compliant strike drone for $600. But because they work in the operational force, these technologies will likely never be adopted and scaled by the Department of Defense. The DoD demands an educated military, but in addition to building more STEM talent to intake, how can the department better leverage the amazing and diverse intellectual capital that already exists in our operational, not our R&D, fighting forces?
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So let me take that. That's you know, squarely in my lane. So I would say you know, we have programs that may not you know, have been you know, widely disseminated, called Radar, you know, AppFit and others. And so, not to take up any more time, come see me and we'll make that connection.
I want to hear the answer to that question too. So
And I would add that there is an R&D program that comes out of one. I know Army Research Lab participates, Pathfinder Catalyst. So at the Fort Drum in Kentucky, and also I think down in North Carolina. But you make a very good point, and I think we have to be sort of cognizant of the fact that the operational community really can help to set the picture for what's needed. And as a scientist, we have great ideas, but not that operational experience. So the merging of the two, I think, will help, as you said, take advantage of an educated soldier force.
Thank you for that.
Hello, thank you for the panel discussion today. My name is Mia Renna. I'm a former engineer officer in the U.S. Army and currently a PhD student at University of Maryland in civil engineering, so go Terps.
Terps.
Yeah. So I have a quick question for the panel based on a stat that Dr. Pines shared earlier about currently recruiting STEM students from American backgrounds, but more specifically my question of backgrounds with low socioeconomic status, some with dependents. How are we encouraging and recruiting people from continuing on past bachelor's into graduate studies, especially when you're looking at how much money you could be making? In the private sector, I think everyone in the audience who works for government also has the same concern. You can make so much going into private sector directly versus sticking around and staying in graduate school. So how are we addressing that recruitment issue?
Well, I'll take a start, Mia. Congratulations on getting your doctoral work done at University of Maryland in civil engineering. So in STEM majors, not only are there undergraduate financial programs for students from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. So from the lowest quintile, you literally can get a free ride at most schools around the nation, definitely at the University of Maryland, especially if you're in the category of so-called Pell eligible. So that's number one. Number two, on merit and need, you can get full rides to go to undergrad. But what you also don't know that in the STEM areas, you also get it fully paid, right? So it's either paid through a research contract or paid through a graduate fellowship, or at the worst case is a teaching assistantship. But pretty much 95% of students who get degrees in math, physics, chemistry, astronomy, engineering, computer science, they don't have to pay a single dollar because it's funded through either those programs that I just mentioned. Now, why should you do it? Because I know you see the big dollars at whatever these major technology firms, is because in the long term, your career will be more enriched, you'll have greater opportunity, and you'll have greater capacity to do the things that you want to do in a long career. So don't think about the short term and just see the dollar figures. Think about your journey and success to be sort of, one of us sitting across this panel today.
And then within the federal government, of course, encouraging this tuition reimbursement. There's also programs that will send people for master's and doctorate degrees. And within the intelligence community, we have our own university, National Intelligence University, which is an accredited institution where you can also do your work. So we are very much encouraging if people want to come to work first and then have the government pay for it. That's another way.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, everybody. This has been an amazing panel. I'm Lucas Toma, true LA. I'm also Army Reservist, but my day job is at Space Force, at Space Systems Command. We have the Cyber Halo Innovation Research Project, or CHIRP. We call the students Chirpicorns because they're special. But it specifically targets underserved communities in STEM majors to bring them into government positions in Space Force acquisitions, or at least the Space Defense Industrial Base. The main factor is budget, but that's everybody's problem. The second thing is clearances. That is the biggest stumbling block. There is fear in those communities based on maybe their immediate family is undocumented or incarcerated or whatever it may be. So overcoming that just on the application process is really hard for us. And also the length of time it takes. We have them for 2 years in this program and we're struggling just to get them cleared at secret, if that. And so are there any strategies or approaches that your organizations have found are successful in overcoming those fears and also accelerating that clearance process to whatever degree it can be?
Can I take at least part of that one? So a couple things. One, on the last part of it, the accelerating clearances. Across the intelligence community, we have all committed to a median application to final job offer of 180 days, which is so tremendously impactful based on what it used to be. So it still sounds like a lot, but it is so much better than it was. And we're not there yet, but we are getting there. So that will help a little bit. With respect to the other side of things, I've already forgotten the other part of your question.
just overcoming the fear in certain
fear,
communities
thank you.
that don't have a.
Cultural competence training for our recruiters has been something that we have invested in, sending people to courses where they can learn different populations and what they need. Some folks need their parents to be on board before they apply to something like a national security job. Others, to your point, are afraid because they've got undocumented family. First of all, that should not stop anyone. That is not a requirement. It is who you are, not who your family is. We work through things like that, but people have to not be afraid in the beginning. And so we're trying to put out information papers and slick sheets that actually cover what security clearance does and doesn't look at. But it will take more of us having those conversations directly. So thank you for raising it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, just want to say thank you so much for your time. I'm Mike Hastings. I work on AI policy at Google. And yeah, it's awesome that you got the grant, Dr. Pines. Congrats, and go Bears. I was an intelligence officer back in the day. One of the things that like really made me bristle was the term near peer, particularly when it comes to China. You know, AI, massively important. Quantum, even more so. And they have the edge. So I think the emphasis on like growing domestic talent and getting diverse talent is super important, but it takes time. And it takes political will that we may or may not have. So for that short-term gap where we really need scientists and talent, I kind of want to push back a little bit on like the competitive nature of the government's willingness to pay for talent. You know, like there's tuition reimbursement, but the private sector has that too, and quite frankly, a lot better. So I wonder if those conversations are happening with Congress to really press for more funding, and if so, what do those look like, and what do you think like the prospect is for being able to like swing with the private sector for that talent in the short term?
What I've seen us able to do is more for some cases, like what you're describing, something at scale where we're able to pay everyone kind of what they would make and then in the open market, we're not there yet. However, for individuals with very specific talent, I have seen us able to do that, but there are caps that we have to meet that frankly are still below what industry can pay in many cases. We're trying to make it easier for people to go back and forth, so I love the idea that people will leave government and go into industry, because at some point some of them will want to come back and bring those great experiences. We have to make that a process that is easier for folks. We continue to have the conversation with Congress, and even as we are able to add supplementals to the STEM talent, it's still not enough. It helps, but still not enough. And so we are actively engaging in the conversations, but we definitely haven't solved it.
Yeah, so I'd echo that and say my career is an exemplar of being able to go back and forth. And you know, if you've been on the other side, you know that we have the most compelling problems. And that's what brings me back to serve. And my principal directors for my critical technology areas all have an expiration date to go back to academia, industry, or wherever to quickly you know, work and provide their expertise, but to go back out, and so we can have tech refresh. And so, as Dr. Dixon said, we're not competitive yet, but if money is your motivator, we don't want you. Period.
And I just want to say something on this. There's no better honorable thing to do to take your talent and give it back to the United States, not for a monetary gain. I was a DARPA program manager for 3 years, probably the best 3 years I ever had in my entire life. It was during the Gulf War dynamics, and we focused on near-term technologies, got them to the theater, and long-term technologies. And I felt so good that my knowledge base, my contributions from a technology perspective were being used to benefit the U.S. national security interests. So there's no more honorable service than to give that back of your ideas.
Hi, my name is Cecily McLeod, and I'm the Visiting Senior Fellow for Cities and Democracy here at the Truman Center. I'm also an attorney, and so my question is about barriers for young people. So whether it's high school students, students at in undergrad or graduate school, one of the barriers that I've seen with them getting internships or opportunities with government agencies and national security is that they cannot physically or financially afford to come to Washington, D.C. for a summer or for a semester. That is a barrier to them. I teach history at Georgia State University, and some of my students are, well, I want to go to DC, but I can't afford to get there. I know that there have been some innovations kind of in the wake of COVID offering virtual internships, like the State Department has that, and I've kind of steered them there. I want to get your thoughts on virtual internships or how you manage that barrier for students in rural neighborhoods or in rural environments or in students in communities of color.
We definitely have recognized that that's a challenge, and there are a number of organizations that do have facilities that are in other places. We have to do a better job of leveraging those as well as advertising where those are. And some of them happen to be adjacent to or within communities, underserved communities, so that's sort of a perfect match for at least that community. We've also recognized that not everyone who is an adult wants to move to the DC area to be part of our community, and so how do we think about I see community campuses in other parts of the country, and that's something that we've taken on. It's a longer-term goal, but how do we make sure that we've got more representation in other places so not everyone has to move here, period, which will also solve part of that problem.
Yeah, and if I can add to Dr. Dixon's last point, so this is where, it's amazing how we would never talk about virtual stuff in the past, before pandemic, right? But we use virtual media as a mechanism to level the playing field. So for example, in Prince George's County, which is where University of Maryland lives, the superintendent called me in July of 2020, and said, I need math teachers to teach math to my most remote and underserved populations. So we ended up teaching pre-calculus and advanced algebra to 10 high schools of Prince George's County. And guess what? We're still doing it today for free. So now we've trained, and this is dual enrollment, so they get a grade in high school and they get a grade in college. But it was a sort of a give back thing to be able to provide them with high quality instruction with mentor and tutorial services, all provided by us as a way to give back to the county. This is again where virtual learning to an underserved population can really be beneficial. So.
Y'all, I'm so sorry, but they reset our timer twice, and now it is blinking hard at me on red 0 for lunch. But I think our panelists will absolutely answer your questions as well after. Please talk to them. With that, it is all the time we